All right, it looks like we've hit a critical mass, so I am going to go ahead and get us started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to what I'm sure is going to be a dynamic and inspiring discussion this evening. I'm Chris Guillard, one of the founding partners of CMG Landscape Architecture, and it's my honor to provide a brief intro to this evening's event. Over the past several years, CMG has organized and hosted a series of panel discussions and gatherings with the goal of expanding our understanding of topics that we believe are essential to our work and to the planning and design of the community more broadly. In previous salons, we've explored democratic public space, climate positive design, and women and leadership in design. Tonight's discussion, also about design, but specifically community design, is the second and third part of a series focused on equity and landscape architecture. Our goal with this series is to convene innovative and distinguished professionals and educators who are focused on inclusive design processes, community co-creation, and increasing representation and equity in the public realm and the profession. The first salon, The Power of Representation, focused on the experiences of designers of color in landscape architecture and how academia, public agencies, and private firms can create positive trajectories for equity and racial justice. The goal of this evening's session is to explore how we can go beyond traditional community engagement processes by working with communities to build trust, capacity, and to define and design more equitable and inclusive communities. Over the past decade, and certainly over the past couple of years, there's been a notable shift in thinking about the role of designers in the shaping of our built environment, and a new generation of professionals, educators, and importantly, advocates have been the catalyst behind this shift. And while I think there's been real progress in creating new approaches and changing the dialogue, we clearly have a long way to go. One of the big questions we'll be hearing about tonight is how we get past lip service and how we move from rhetoric to embodiment. We have an amazing group of panelists who are going to share their unique perspectives about democratic design, co-creation, and lived experiences that will ground all of us in the work that we need to advance to get together. Joining us this evening are Keita Price, Director of Urban and Regional Planning for the East Oakland Collective, David De La Pena, Professor of Landscape Architecture at UC Davis, Diane Jones-Allen, Program Director of Landscape Architecture at UT Arlington and Principal at Design Jones, and Antwi Acombe, Founding Director of UCSF SFSU's Social Innovation and Urban Opportunity Lab and co-founder of Streetwise. So our format for this evening is that each panelist is going to introduce themselves and give an 8 to 10 minute presentation. And then that's going to be followed by about 10 to 15 minutes of dialogue where the panelists will be able to riff off of each other and ask questions. And the aim is really to create a more lively and engaging dialogue throughout the evening. Then we'll wrap up with Q&A with selected questions from the audience. And we please ask you to go ahead and submit your questions using the webinar's Q&A function. We encourage the chat for discourse, but it won't be monitored for questions. All right, so let's get this going. I'm delighted to introduce Keita Price, who's going to lead us off.
Cool. Hey, what's up with it? Good evening, everybody. How you doing? Let me get a presentation together. All right. So yes, so what it everybody? How you doing? I'm Keita Price, Director of Urban and Regional Planning for the East Oakland Collective, and I'll be talking about equitable community and design. I'm a planner, but we do dabble in some planning, some design as well, and development soon. Next slide. Okay. Cool. So again, I said I'm with the East Oakland Collective. A lot of you may be familiar with the East Oakland Collective, but most familiar with our homelessness service and solutions area, where we do a lot of food distribution, a lot of policy and direct service action to help our unhoused brothers and sisters. And once COVID came, we expanded that to just everyday BIPOC low income residents of Deep East Oakland. But from day one, 5 years now, EOC been around, we've always been throwing ourselves out there doing culturally relevant community engagement. So priding ourselves on doing that we kind of fell in a lane of climate and transportation related projects that that we became to be called on as experts to do this work. So after 2020 of COVID going on, we noticed that climate and transportation investments, even with COVID, continue to have high projections. And it's definitely a place that I didn't see a lot of Black representation, especially Black from Deep East Oakland. And so, yes, we decided to create a neighborhood and transportation planning area that is designed to disrupt the status quo of traditional city planning, city and regional planning, by supporting East Oakland residents and neighborhoods with culturally competent community planners to lead equitable community engagement for environmental, parks and open space, and transportation related projects and policies. And on the screen you see here is our team. 5 years ago, I started doing this work by myself. EOC was very small but mighty, and you'll hear a bit over time of how we got to where we are. Excuse me, it's Fleet Week, so they've been flying over my house all day. All right, so the agenda. I'm gonna get y'all a little familiar with Deep East Oakland first, talk a little bit about the history, the people, and the landscape. We'll get right into equitable community planning and design, talking a lot about defining equity and what EOC, how we define that and put it into action. And then want to get into further talking about how to redistribute power and resources. And then a few key takeaways that I feel like you all should have. All right. So first, Deep East Oakland, and this is my mom, by the way. The history, the people, and again, the landscape. So first and foremost, we want to start with the history. You know, a lot of you all in Spurs should be very familiar at this point with this redlining map, and should be somewhat familiar of the effects of redlining that it has.
Okay, it looks like the webinar froze, or at least Kita did. And so we're going to pause for a moment and see if we can solve this. Can you all hear me? If so, can you confirm on the chat? Okay, great. Okay, so let's see if we can solve it with Kita. And maybe what we'll do here is transition to one of the other panelists and then come back to Kita. So hopefully we can move forward here. So David, if you're ready to go ahead and jump up, Kita's back. All right, we lost you, Kita. You're. Go ahead and unmute. There you go.
I'm sorry, I was talking this time. Okay, I can see you now. All right. So sorry, as I was saying, the map on the left is a Visit Oakland map. To me, it just reflects just what's buzzing economically and what's not. And so you don't see East Oakland very much represented. The flatland communities where I'm from represented. The same area that I showed you up here, that's redline. And so also just wanted to note that East Oakland has also historically always been kind of industrial and commercial. And so that's one of the kind of injustices, are just environmental impacts that we have been ourselves into kind of reversing. Moving forward, again, the people are the greatest assets of Deep East Oakland to me. I am born and raised from Deep East Oakland, 3rd generation native. My folks come by way of Memphis, Texas, and some other places. And so, yes, I just feel like our people, Deep East Oakland folks of all backgrounds and we just resilient by nature. So we have weathered the storm of, again, environmental justice, systematic social and economic injustices, and just still continue to just thrive, in my opinion, today, regardless of what you may hear on TV or the news, the height of violence. Even right now, we have a high number of homicides that's been going on. But even in the midst of all of that, is just so much opportunity, creativity, and just desire and ambition to want more for our neighborhoods by enough people to believe that is real. Third thing I would like to share with you about Deep East Oakland is the landscape. I love the landscape. Oakland. You can go from the hills to the flatlands, the neighborhoods, you know, to the waterfront. And I feel like some of us take this for granted by limiting ourselves and staying in the flats for a lot of reasons, us not feeling like certain spaces are ours or whatever have you. But, you know, I make sure that I claim every inch of deep East Oakland or East Oakland, Oakland period, you know, as mine. I pay my taxes here. So you'll catch me in the hills up there at the Leona Creek, at, you know, catching the views up here where I'm at. This is Merritt College. Behind me, you can see the Martin Luther King Jr. shoreline, which is also my background. And the picture up here and down at the bottom, the video is a creek. Like what I love about East Oakland is a lot of like just creeks kind of like tucked in the neighborhood. And it's a lot of potential and opportunity to do some stuff with those creeks. And I'm actually an independent contractor to do engagement on this particular creek. So it's one of my favorite places in the neighborhood to be. So that's Deep East Oakland. Really quickly in a nutshell, again, a lot of history of injustices, just like a lot of urban different cities that we still deal with today, but being super resilient through that. The people and the culture is the greatest asset, in the food, the dancing, and everything. And the landscape is just beautiful. So now I just want to go into a bit about defining equity and EOC's approach to that. So I've been hearing this word equity, buzzword equity for, I guess 5 years now, kind of throwing myself into this work. And so, yes, I still haven't found like a definition I'm super comfortable with. So here is the Google definition, which is the quality of being fair or impartial. But at the bottom, I wanted to start, you know, I really haven't once tried to start formulating my own definition for equity. So this is like my first shot at it, of doing it. You know, I talk about it, I do it, I know what it feels like was necessary because of my experiences, but formally still trying to figure out how to translate that. And so, you know, I found this picture and it spoke to me a little bit more than the typical standard picture you see of folks having a box to, you know, equitably see over the fence. And so this to me showed better just the redistribution of resources and power that's needed, you know, to the overburdened communities that have been, again, burdened by historical, racial, and economic inequalities, such as Deep East Oakland. So with that said, long story short, we need to redistribute, you know, resources and power, and we need to be comfortable with doing that. And when I say we, I mean everybody, everybody have to give and take in some kind of way. So we just kind of got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and not to take away anything from anybody, but it's going to be a change and an adjustment, and change and adjustment, you know, it's just a little different. So yes, we have to prepare for that. And side note, I've heard from some people from their mouth, a white male actually, when I was out in Haiti doing mission work, that when we were talking about equity and equality, and he straight up out of his mouth told me that he's like, you know, what does it mean for the Black people, or, you know, for the folks that I'm fighting for, what does it mean for you to get, you know, more and then we get less? Like, I never said that you're gonna get less. I just said that we need to get to, you know, the same stance so that we can at least be on level playing fields, as people call it often. And so this is like, it's a real thing or whatnot. This recent, it may be cliche or not new for some of you, but the redistribution of power is harder to do than said, from the individual to the entity, to the agency, to the private sector. And so EOC's approach is to really challenge the standard planning and design processes to include and prioritize and patron at an equitable wage East Oakland residents and individuals. Like I mentioned, we like to lead culturally relevant engagement and meet residents where they're at, focus on the intersections of races, racial and economic justice, and really hold the city and all parties and ourselves accountable to address anti-Black practices of hiring within the city's department. So here on the slide, you see the Oakland People's Plan. EOC and a coalition of CBOs and individuals band together to try to revolutionize a different way of doing our Oakland General Plan update. So right now, the city of Oakland is about to update the general plan for the first time in about 2 decades, 5 years actually. And so this coalition, the Oakland People's Plan, instead of having the typical standard one prime that dictates the whole plan and how people engage and when and where, we band together this coalition of different people, different experts from different CBOs to take on different roles and positions to create a collective, like a cooperative crime consultant, opposed to, and so we can redistribute that power and it just not be in the hands of one typical crime consultant. Although we didn't get that RFP, you know, we tried and we still are, you know, holding the city accountable and the chosen RFP consultant accountable to making sure that this general plan update remain equitable as we move forward. And also, lastly, you see the Zoom screenshot is us EOC in a meeting with the Department of Transportation, because in one of our projects, we had some issues, again, with losing a Black planner on our project. And this planner was the only reason why we built trust with this planner to even have the relationship with the department that we did to even do the project that we was on. And so to lose them and to not have adequate reasons that seem to just lead back to poor, systematic, again, racist practices, we wasn't happy with. So we are still having like conversations, even though this project is done, having conversations in this Zoom meeting. You'll see Ryan Russo, which is the director of the department. You'll see somebody from HR, somebody from race and equity. So we bringing people from different departments that can help get to the root cause of some of these issues. And from what OakDOT said, it's some of their HR policies. So that's why HR was there and such. Somebody chat me to let me know about time because I will go. Okay, 2-minute warning. Oh, I'm way over. So I gotta go through a bit since my slide came off. So really wanted to talk about, again, knowing about the table. So knowing about the table, we all talk about, you know, sitting at the table. So I just wanted to acknowledge that for the community, it's for us, it's been an even hurdle to even know about the table or whatnot. I went to Merritt College with a chemistry major and switched to urban planning once I heard about gentrification, but it was no infrastructure to really support me and wanted to like advance in that. Luckily, I met people like Antwi and heard him speak at Merritt and had learned about Black people doing environmental work in a different way that spoke to me, even though I didn't know what that profession was. And so, excuse me for being all over the place because I got time. And then once you get to the table, it's not enough. It's like just the beginning. Once you get to the table, you got to model equity. You got to like, you know, demand respect, trust, build trust with each other in relationship with the different stakeholders. And again, that's harder done than said. And the question and answer, we could talk about that. And I want to get to eliminating the tables to where that it stopped being such exclusive tables that we have such hurdles to know about, to where once we've gotten to these tables, we've expanded who've come to these tables, and now we're creating our own. And with that said, I just wanted to end with one of the projects that we're finally at the point to where we're not being reactionary and working on mandated plans, but we're now leading and developing plans and projects that we have identified to be wanted by community. So this Power to People Martin Luther King Jr. Access study is about exploring clean mobility options of getting the East Oakland community to the Martin Luther King Jr. shoreline. This body of water is overshadowed by the lake, and we can get more residents to there for a better quality of life, more social distance during COVID, and all kinds of reasons, yet it's not really, you know, known about. So throughout this project, we'll bring awareness to this space, activate it, and explore how people can get there in different clean mobility options. These are some of our partners. To build more community influence, we created a community advisory group. The Zoom screenshot is our technical advisory group. They are basically working with the community advisory group to move stuff forward. This is our bike ride. Actually, this Saturday, if you're available, we have a bike ride as part of our community engagement to get people out there and feel an experience of using a clean mobility option to the shoreline. And we'll engage them about some of the ideas that we've been having since the Resilient by Design, which we participated with Chris and CMG. We've had these ideas about stitching and adapting the shoreline. And so once we get them down there, we want to start having these conversations on how they can reimagine, revision, and restore the shoreline, you know, for them. So yes, key takeaways: work towards eliminating exclusive tables and try to put equity in practice by really get comfortable by being uncomfortable and redistribute the power and resources or space and whatever it is that you have and you can share. Thank you. Here, you can follow EOC. Sorry, follow us here, and I'll drop all this in the chat.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Keita. Let's go ahead and have the other panelists join in and open up a dialogue with you about the work that you shared.
So I have a question. Can we start?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, good. So Keita, that was really inspiring. My question is about transportation.
Keita, do you want to come back
Yes.
on? Oh, no.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, my question was about transportation. So I really like the idea of the clean transportation, but I also wanted to talk about transportation in terms of, you know, you were talking about equity and the fact that, you know, transportation dollars in state, you know, transportation is usually state funded, but it's distributed inequitably. And that's why we have like transit deserts. So I wanted to talk to you, get your take on how do you work to get some of those transportation dollars to your community so that you all can have, you know, access.
Right. Thank you. So one way we work on it is to make sure that we just first know about it. So again, knowing is a big thing. So that's, and I spend a lot of my time just trying to stay in the know of things and build relationship. And so what we've learned, what works, I guess, in the urban world or locally is to have some of this stuff written down in plans. People recognize it. And so that's why we've really been creating the infrastructure to create community planners so that we can create these plans that show our priorities for these monies that we know and see have said that is coming. And so it's more easier for us to go advocate for it when we've shown that we've done this, even though it shouldn't always have to take all of that, but they want to see data and that we've talked to somebody. So EOC, we've done a Let's Bike Oakland plan. We've just finished our East Oakland Community Action Plan, which actually touches a lot of what you're talking about. It get released hopefully next month. And so the way we do it is really work with these different agencies, identify the funding that's coming with them, and so kind of prepare together to place a trajectory to intercept those funds. Like the Plan Bay Area 2050 is a big plan by MTC, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. And so we've written them letters, gave them like, you know, a whole synopsis of what projects will work for certain buckets and stuff like that. So we'll do certain things like that with the MTC, we're doing it with the Park District. We really are taking initiative to build rapport with certain folks to just be more in the know. So.
That's great, thanks.
Great work, it was great to hear all the projects you're doing. At some point you said your projects were designed to disrupt city planning processes. And this word has been in my mind for a little while, this idea of disruption. And I just wonder, maybe from anybody, but from you first, do you think there's a different space now for disruption? Like somehow it's become actually expected. Our lives are all disrupted anyways, but in particular around equity. I feel like we've all played nice for a really long time, and the sort of like harmonious notions of diversity, and now we are talking about disruption. I think it's really actually exciting opening. But I wonder what you think about that term.
I think the term it could be a little controversial sometimes for some folks to use. I personally have been fond of it and been really trying to identify even for myself, like, what does that mean? You know, we said it because it started kind of as a buzzword, but because I'm a rebel at heart, so that's what I came to do. You know, that's how my energy was in college, but I tried to transform that, got it more emotionally balanced. So trying to disrupt in a more, I guess, strategic way. And so I still think it's necessary to disrupt, even though it's expected. People expect it to meet still in a surface level. So like really just, like you said, being blunt, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, and not just with these agencies, community too. It's a lot of community CBO on CBO crime and whatever inequities that goes on too. And I feel like we focus a lot on the agencies and not also with each other. So for EOC, our disruption is holding everybody accountable. Again, you feel me, to to the agreements that we all made to be here, and like not really letting anything else, you know, get in the way of that. Without being accountability police, just like we all agreed to be here.
I definitely always inspired, Keita, by your work. You're such an inspiration to me. Thank you for keeping it real. And I want to make sure we continue to work together. But I think you should also, it would be great if you could share with the audience a little bit about your work with Black cultural zones and what you mean by, you know, planning for the people, by the people, and power to the people. I feel like EOC has been so instrumental in making those things happen in the Deep East. And it would be great if you could share with the audience, you know, a bit more about the powerful work that you're doing on the ground with everyday people in East Oakland.
Yeah, sure. I did not have enough time for the slides, but yes, so the East Oakland Black Culture Zone, EOC for the past 3.5 years have been a part of the Black Culture Zone. And for the Black Culture Zone is basically a kind of coalition and collaboration of CBOs, faith-based, and individuals that want to preserve Black people and culture straight up. And we're doing that through economic advancement, through placemaking, arts and culture, and focusing on the quality of life. And so as Antwi had mentioned, there's now, through our development and talking to community for over these 3 years, we've heard enough that we want to hear, we want people, they want skating rinks, they want healthy food, you know, farmers market, they want a place to be Black and to be unapologetic, but still respectful of one another. And so after hearing this for 3 years, it was part of EOC's duty as a partner to help create a CDC, a Community Development Corporation for the Black culture. You may know most CDCs it's like the Unity Council, EBOGZ. So like a lot of the other cultural ethnicities have community development corporations, you know, that help them anchor certain geographic that you can go to and know that you're gonna, you know, experience their culture and patron, you know, the folks. And so we wanted that too. So right now we have been able to temporarily activate a space at the Eastmont Mall. It's been a parcel 6955 Foothill Boulevard. You know, it's been kind of vacant for a while, but it's on a surplus land list. And so it has to be slated for affordable housing. So in the meantime, the Black Culture Zone we also put in a bid to get it as a developer, but in the meantime, we've been activating that space for a year now. We just had our year anniversary in September. We went from having a farmer's market of 5 vendors to our year anniversary, having at least 5, having scaled up to, again, a skating rink, and just starting to see more of the, like literally been to see the outcome of all of what we've been talking about and meeting about and people about on paper. So that's the community development project that's still underway, and we know we're building on top of, but yeah, we're really proud of the Black Culture Zone and preservation of that we've been doing there.
Yeah, Keita, you know, it's been a couple of years since Resilient by Design, and I, you know, of course, have been following the work that you've been doing and all the coalitions that you work with, and it's impressive to see the progress that you all have been able to make holistically. So fantastic. David, you want to go ahead and jump in and share, and then we'll go to another round of dialogue.
Absolutely. Let me get my screen up. All right, you're seeing the actual screen, not the notes, right? Okay, so I am an architect actually by training, and come into landscape through a roundabout way through sort of urban design and planning. Also will say that I am a Filipino American and sort of grew up in between 2 cultures, in between the Philippines and in the US. My parents were actually missionaries. And so this idea of sort of colonization and sort of expertise and people going into other places and telling them what to do has sort of always been at the forefront of my mind. And I think when I went into architecture, I thought I was going into a neutral kind of career that wasn't going to challenge that. and I was actually pretty wrong. So I want to share a few projects that have sort of been instrumental in my own evolution and thinking about equity and design. Because I think when I first started as a professional and even as a professor, I sort of put race in the background. I sort of put my own identity, but also that of the people in the communities that I worked with as something that wasn't really primary, something I didn't foreground very much. So this is actually this image is a place in the Central Valley in California called Wasco, the home of the rose growing, especially for the Rose Parade. And in 2008, I was part of the design team that went here to do a downtown renovation plan. And I don't know if any of you have ever used community image surveys, but we did this survey with the community at a public meeting, flashing a bunch of images on and asking them to rate them. Do you like this image? Do you not like this image? This image came up as the most disliked image of any of them, and it surprised all of the designers. At the workshop itself, there was a pretty diverse but small group of people, and this gentleman here in the red United Farm Workers hat at the very end of the meeting stood up and said, you know what's wrong with this image of this clock is that in that traffic circle used to be our community gazebo, and it's where all of the Hispanic leaders would go in the evenings after work to talk about work, to talk about the union, to talk about their lives. And it was something that the city took away from them to replace it because they didn't like that people were gathering here in the street. So at the end of this meeting, we asked the organizers, the city representatives, where we should go for dinner. And they all basically said, well, don't go downtown because there's nothing happening downtown. There's like a Denny's off the highway. So why don't you drive out of downtown, go to the Denny's. And we sort of had a hunch that something else was up. And so we went downtown anyways and went to this Mexican restaurant and discovered that not only was there plenty going on downtown, that it was one of the most lively places that we had seen. In fact, the downtown didn't need to be renovated at all. The city was trying to put in ordinances to control signage, to control what colors you could paint the buildings. They were actually in a very active process of what now I see as a very sort of racist intention of sort of bringing back the white culture into this town. And so this was just one of a bunch of projects, and it's actually not necessarily a new approach in planning. If we look way back, this is actually the planning of the Lincoln Center. This is including Rockefellers and Moses sitting on top of a building looking over what will become Lincoln Center, and this neighborhood, which was San Juan Hill. And San Juan Hill was declared blighted in order to pave the way for this project. But actually San Juan Hill was itself a very vital and thriving community and had a very lively music scene of its own, especially jazz. This was the home of Dizzy Gillespie. Before Black Harlem, there was San Juan Hill. And so this lack of appreciation or ability to see the inherent values of a place is really goes way back in our history of urban planning. So when I went back to do my PhD, I wanted to ask this question: how can we do participation better? And one of my former mentors there at Berkeley said, "Why do you want to do participation? I don't understand it. This is something nobody really likes. Why would you want to study it?" And so I said, exactly. This is why I want to study this. This is my layperson's breakdown of the history of participation in the U.S. And I'm not going to go into detail or read it through, but essentially we have a backlash from the type of planning that happened in the 1950s and 60s through urban renewal, and these demands to include participation in our public processes, which we have done and now have become very manipulable, very easily controlled in order to get communities to sort of, or community buy-in on projects that maybe already were pre-baked. And this is like for me, the in Star Wars, you know, that you think the story's done, and then you have the prequel. Well, so this is my prequel. Actually, before urban renewal, before modernism, people have always been making cities, and this is part of my my own realization, is that like long before architects, long before planners, cities were vital, amazing places with public spaces that responded to people's needs, to culture, to ecology, to local practices. And it's only now that we think we're rediscovering participation in city planning, but actually what we're trying to do is tap into what has always been there. So what is participation then? For me, it's not inviting a lot of different people to come to your party or to your workshop or to your charrette. Participation is you as a designer or planner figuring out how you can get invited to their party. So here we have Frank Gehry, obviously. I don't know why I like to pick on Frank Gehry a lot, but it's sort of a representation of a sort of typical conventional hotshot architecture practice. And this is some random median on a freeway in Mexico City, right? Where people have actually made lively public space out of the remnants of an urban plan. So actually Diane was part of this project that I worked on 4 or 5 years ago for this book that collected a bunch of examples about how people are doing participation across the country, around the world. And what we did was come up with a way of thinking as a framework of how we can, as designers, look at how we prepare ourselves to do the work, how we go to places and very meaningfully engage with people. And I won't go into any detail on this, but happy to answer questions later. A couple of projects, further projects that I've worked on in Sacramento, where I live. We have a farm to fork movement, which has been going on and is actually promoted by the Chamber of Commerce. But we really haven't understood very well where urban food is being produced in the city. This is a map of what we did know, 7 years ago when I started this project, as far as where the city's community gardens are. This was pretty much the official version of urban ag in the city. And we've been adding a lot of different types of uses, from nurseries to farmers markets to grocery stores, et cetera, to really fully understand where food is being produced. And not only that, to overlay that with other sorts of social demographic metrics to understand whether, in fact, those places are meeting the needs or are actually located in places where there are needs or food access issues. Some of this, one of the outcomes of this project was to realize that the sites with the most food production in the city of Sacramento were all stewarded by first-generation immigrants. So this was one of these sites, the International Garden of Many Colors, which in the 1990s, early 1990s, was just a vacant parcel of land underneath power lines. And we sort of stumbled into this project with this scenario where the city was trying to evict them. They desperately wanted them out of this site. They were going to build them a new community garden, and they didn't understand why people didn't want to move. They couldn't get it in their heads that people who had built their own gardens wouldn't want a garden with plenty of water, with lights, with benches, with all sorts of amenities. The garden itself wasn't the most attractive thing in the traditional sense of the word, unless you were sort of a lover of food and plants. And the city didn't see its community garden program as really about that. It was gardened by first-generation immigrants almost entirely, and then eventually some of their children, Latinx, and mostly Ukrainians, actually, and then now some Hmong. And my class for several years has been working on this project, going to the garden and helping my students really understand that despite all of the expertise they've gained around plants and landscape architecture, that they really need to be very humble because these gardeners know so much more about this place, about food, about propagation than they probably ever will. We went on to discover that a lot of the reticence of the gardeners had to do with a long cultural history, which I won't go into here, but has to do with the collapse of the Soviet food system and the sort of provision of their own food through dacha gardens. And then the collapse in the 80s, which was just preceded the migration of so many Soviet residents to Sacramento. So this project actually is ongoing and is now receiving a little more attention and quite a bit of funding actually from the city to improve the existing situation, after pointing out to them or showing them actually that the beauty was already inherent in the garden. And then finally, one last project. And just to mention, this is actually the first project I've done as an academic that has race in the foreground. And it sort of surprised me to realize that despite thinking that I have been, as a person of color in academia, really supporting minority groups or underrepresented people, that I've never actually put it in the foreground. And so this is a project in Lake Tahoe that I'm just starting now, which is acknowledging that Lake Tahoe is 40% Spanish speaking, and that's reflected nowhere in the public image or in most of the planning processes that happen in the city. And so I'm really excited to be working on this project now. We're working with the Multicultural Alliance in South Lake Tahoe to develop a series of maps and stories about how Latinx and also now Filipino residents have experienced this place. I have been pushed by a lot of students to do more work and better work around equity. Some of my students in my class have prepared and started a JEDI Council, which is Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And they are really pushing us to change our curriculum. And that's been really inspiring for me along the lines of what I was asking around disruption. These students are actually disrupting quite a bit and pushing me to do better. And so where I am right now is working on, my own positioning as far as where landscape architecture should be and what colonization means and how we can change our position to do better. And that is the end of my slideshow, but I'd love to have a conversation with you all.
Excellent. The other panelists want to jump back in, and I'll just note as we enter this dialogue period that we are running a little bit behind on time. So I'm going to hop in here probably in like 5 or 6 minutes. And so you all can have a discussion, and then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A from the audience as well. So.
Well, I can start again. Yeah, you mentioned control, and I really struggle with that. I think we as designers struggle with that, even like with our little cookbook. These are the things we will do, and So could you talk a little bit more about that? I really like that you just said that word, and so you could talk more about that.
It's funny you mentioned control. One of my memories of doing this book with you was that there was a lot of control issues around how we put this book together. I think it is true. We as designers really like to manage the process, and controlling the participation process is something that gives us a lot of power. And so I think for me it's not so much about what technique works best in the book or anything like that. It's about the attitude that we're bringing to the work. And a lot of that is letting go of some of that control, and realizing that the more you let go of the control, the more you open up places for people to insert themselves. So I don't know exactly if there's more to specifically what you mean by control. But that's what comes to mind for me.
No, that's great.
Yes, I just wanted to mention, first of all, everybody, we all appreciate your caption. You got to teach us how to do that.
I don't know how that happens, but.
Oh, wow. I needed that. But yes, I just wanted to mention, your garden project looks similar to like the Salon, like the easement, just very similar to the easement in the Salon Creek project that I'm working on. And I saw that it has the same like patch of grass, about the same size, and there's power lines over it, just the same. So I was just curious, so the communities or your response or thoughts around the public health concern, or is there a concern? Like, that's still new to me, saying like, we want to put something under that space, but it's like, it's power lines like that. So I'm just curious on how did y'all deal with that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. It's something that we've struggled with for a while. The city used the word security a lot, security and safety, and they used it as a way of sort of trying to get their way to evict the gardeners. They sort of pretended that the two power companies, which was SMUD and WAPA, which is a regional power agency, wouldn't allow the garden underneath the power lines for safety reasons. And actually there is a risk, not so much from as much from the emitting anything from the power lines, but from actual like lightning strikes. And so we're still actually working on that aspect a little bit. But the gardeners saw it as a food, as a food security issue. While the city was saying Homeland Security won't let us have you there, the gardeners said, well, this is our choice to be under these lines, and actually putting food on our tables is our primary health concern. So we have sort of left it at that.
Thank you.
Do we have time for?
Yeah, let's do one more.
Okay, fantastic presentation, David. Just doing extraordinary work out there. And thank you so much for sharing with all of us. So much of your work is around this concept of designing democracy. And I'd love to know a little bit more, and I think it'd be great if you could share with the audience some of the amazing work you're doing in the world. You mentioned Latin America and other places, really around designing democracy and making community engagement more authentic and more meaningful from the perspective of everyday people.
Yeah, there's so much work being done out there by groups all over. I've been working with a couple of groups in Mexico, but also very recently and currently in Chile. In the northern Patagonian Lakes region, we have actually an exchange between some folks there and folks that are studying Lake Tahoe. So that's the dual pronged project here is sort of paying off in both ends. But I'm trying to use it as a way to sort of challenge both sides. So the Lake Tahoe planners, and maybe some are on this. I hope some are on this panel or this Zoom. I do really, really wonderful work. And yet there's a blind eye, there's a blindness to sort of the community that is actually suffering at the same time that they're promoting a narrative of sustainable growth. That actually the housing shortages, the challenges to people's sort of mental health and physical health from living in situations that are not equitable or just. Like that's a parallel narrative to what's happening in Tahoe, and it's just going unnoticed. So I think for me, there's a lot of the common thread is pulling out the story that's being buried or that's hidden, and trying to tell it well, because it actually informs where we need to be going. So thanks for the question.
That was an incredibly concise answer to Antwini's question, which was
could have gone on for a while.
Thanks for that. Let's go ahead and shift over and have Diane share some of her ideas and recent work.
Diane, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. And I said I'm going to go through this really quickly. Let's see, advance these slides. Oh, I'm having trouble advancing my slides. Oh, there we go. Okay, so landscape architecture has been one of the most viable ways to positively shape place, give vulnerable communities a voice and a tool for strengthening and sustaining communities in which they live. And I think that because landscape architecture is really, especially for communities, about claiming their spaces. I'm going to give a plug here for a film by Austin Allen called Claiming Open Spaces. It's an old film, but it's so relevant today. And if you haven't seen it, you should see it. But anyway, so I think, yes, landscape architecture is a way for communities to take control and claim their spaces. So I'm gonna show you 3 projects. One focuses on grassroots funding, defining their own future, and then appropriate technology. So this project, the Martin Luther King Memorial in New Orleans, is really about how communities, if they control money, they can kind of control what happens, and then they can work together. This was a neighborhood. This project is in a neighborhood that was facing gentrification post-Katrina, really hard. All kinds of new things happening because it's beautiful old buildings and new things happening, new people moving into the neighborhood. And as you could see, all kinds of both public and private money, the New Orleans jazz market, and then people renovating, old homes and prior warehouse buildings. And also with the new community comes, new uses, new people move in. And some of the things they like to do is like this Jane Jacobs walk. But this community, had a history, right? And it had a whole other set of people that were there before. Some didn't get pushed out, but some remained. And they use the neighborhood and the space in a different way. This is a group called Real who comes to this space on Martin Luther King's actual birthday, not the holiday, to actually celebrate and to protest. And so the thing here was, how do you get these diverse groups to come together? And, you get them to come together around, getting, the funding. So we had the Neighborhood Association, nonprofit, the Gulf Coast Housing, Shea Cultural Center, some of the community organizations, the organization Real, so the old and new community members, because communities are diverse, right? They're not a monolith. So trying to get those people to come around, and so getting them to collaborate together and to go after funding. Then the next thing is, really shaping what you're going to do, making the argument about history. I'm really a fan of history because I think knowing the past of a neighborhood, even if you're going to do something new, it gives people, especially for Black communities, a way to argue, to say this was ours. Here is the evidence, right? And now you can start at that basis and go forward. So that was the case here. This neighborhood was actually a neighborhood where one of the few places in New Orleans where Black people could shop, even though it was an immigrant community, and immigrants kind of owned most of the spaces, Italians, Germans, and then, but Black people, played in the clubs and worked there. And eventually through change and protest, Aretha Haley, who was a member of SNCC, who really kind of letting Black people actually begin to own. The neighborhood changed, and the guy in the middle is Hayden, who was the sculptor that did this sculpture that's there on the space where the project was going to happen. It's kind of a funny story that they wanted something figurative, and he did something that was different, but the community has really embraced it. And so the project was to take this space and make it like the center of the community, and you have these different groups. So the thing is, once you get people to know what's going to happen, they collaborated around funding, really bringing them to the site so they can kind of argue out their differences. And being on site is really important. I mean, usually we put people in rooms, which we also did, but when you get them out there, they can actually talk about, you know, in kind of an open way, you know, what they think should happen or how they use the space. So that was one of the things. And so I was recommending getting people, you know, in the place. And then like doing targeted outreach, because I said the neighborhoods are not, communities are not a monolith. So these were people at a senior citizen group. So we actually went there because we figured, you know, they need the space, they'll be users of the space. And then we did things with younger people. So we had a lot of targeted kind of outreach. And then we had a large outreach and, you know, we put people in the circle, which I really love because it gives people, so everybody's kind of equal. And that's really important when you have different groups to kind of like level out the power. So we put people in a circle. And then we actually, from those meetings, we came up with some alternatives and we went back. That's another thing, you kind of have to keep coming back. And then we ended up with a design. And then this was the final design. And so, you know, we had massive amounts of people to come out. And the space is kind of used in all kinds of different ways, as you could see, you know, because we had the breadth of the community. So then another project that we're working on now, which I'm excited about, is we called Reclaiming Black, or yeah, it's about reclaiming Black settlements. And this one is really about how Black communities define their own future. This project was a grant also from the SOM Foundation. Myself and two other colleagues got it to work with freedland towns along the Trinity River. And as you know, what happens with the history of Black people in America or immigrant communities or people of color, we get pushed like to the bottomlands or to the places where they didn't want. Now all of a sudden they want it. So in Texas, you know, as people escaped slavery and moved west, they settled along the Trinity into the bottomlands. But now the Trinity is, you know, they want to put parks there and they want to do trails there and they want to build homes there. And so these communities are suffering a massive attack. So this project was, how do we get them to secure their space and their land? And so one thing, again, it's about history, like, you know, that's your kind of argument, I say, getting to say that this was ours. Here is the history, right? We have a right to it in this attack. And then also like the same thing, I'm kind of repeating myself, like you have to realize that communities aren't, I would say when people say the community, so communities are not a monolith, like, you know, even if they're communities of color, they're young people, as you could see, kids, and they're older people, and they're, you know, people that are working and people that not. And you want to reach all those kinds of people. You want to reach the, you know, the variety, the diversity of the community. And so here what we did is through these engagements, we got the community to develop their own strategic plan. And this was really exciting because the first thing that they wanted is they wanted a vetting system for people like us. So they basically said they wanted so that when people come in with their grants and their good intentions, that they have to agree to us being there, that we have to sign a contract. So I really like that because they were like pushing back on, you know, kind of like the idea of control. They were saying that one of the things about, you know, they understood power. And so these communities now, you know, Black communities are now, you know, getting more attention. And so they have all kinds of people coming in. They were all forgotten and now they're getting attention, not just from the developers, but from all kinds of people like us that want to come and help them. So they're like, okay, we want a system and a set of guidelines that you have to follow before you come to us with your, I want a grant and here I am to help you. And so I thought that was really, you know, just amazing. And then, you know, the other issues, the landscape and environment, because that's really important. I mean, they're getting attacked because they're in a beautiful landscape that, you know, they're along the river, they're next to the resource. And then the biggest thing was that bringing all these, so they're like, there are many Black settlement freedmen towns across the country, but in Texas, there are a bunch of them. We were only working with 6 because they were kind of, you know, along close to each other, spreading from Dallas to Fort Worth. And so the thing was, you know, getting them to realize that there's strength and power to fight back. So getting them to do a collaborative. So the next project, this last project I'm going to show is about appropriate technology. And what that is, you know, just like being able to put the planning into the community's hands. Often communities, you know, kind of like in David's project, they know the landscape better. They know what, you know, can be built there. They understand, you know, it's there. They have technical knowledge that we don't give them credit for. And so this case was, if we're coming to help, like, you know, letting them share their technical knowledge with us so that the project can be sustainable, not just sustainable in terms of their stewards, but really lasting because, you know, it's the appropriate technology. So this project was in Tanzania, and it was a project where I brought students to work on a health, to work at a health center, actually that have been done with appropriate technology. Someone from the outside had given the community a set of plans and gave them a brick machine, and the community actually built the buildings because the community said that it's better to build they showed the people that came with the brick machine that if you use the certain soil, you could do bricks that didn't have to be kiln dried. And so then the community was given a set of plans, and they just continued to build the center, I mean, the health clinic on their own. And so our idea was, okay, we could do the same thing with the garden. But this shot is actually where we just kind of put a big canvas out there and let the community kind of give us their ideas. And like one of the first things before is getting to understand where you are, understanding the site, climate, the culture, the politics, all that's important. And then making sure that it's community led. I mean, the thing I love about this is, like, if you look at this picture, who's holding the plans? You know, like, they're holding the plans. We're not holding the plans, which usually happens when you have engagement. You know, the designers and architects are holding the plans and the community's following along, but they're holding the plans. They're telling us where they want things to go, what they want to be, you know, to happen there, what the elements of the garden should be. Like, they're holding the plans and determining what's in the plans. So that's really important. This was just, you know, like having, like I said, this kind of transactive approach, which was really great because, so, you know, arts kind of really, was a really great way for them to kind of actually literally kind of draw and paint the things that they wanted and take us around and show us. And then we kind of did an interpretation of that. And then we came back and had a discussion with them. So we didn't have a presentation, which usually happens, you know. So we kind of had, like, as you could see, some of the communities up there talking. So we had a discussion about what, you know, the concept really was. And then hopefully this summer, because we were supposed to come back last summer, but COVID, we'll go back. And we're going to do the same thing. So that garden has several components, as you can see, repeated. So we're going to go back and just build one of the components and leave all the material, you know. So we're going to buy the material there, the stuff that they told us that to build it out of. We're going to build one, you know, component of each part of the garden, leave all the material, and then they'll build the rest. Yeah. So if you have questions, I'll be glad to answer. And hopefully I didn't overrun my time.
You're perfect. Yeah, that was amazing collection of projects, Diane. Thanks so much for sharing. Let's have the other panelists jump back in and mix it up.
First and foremost, you already know I need to find out how I can get out with you and build.
Yes, I'm serious. If you want to come, I'm gonna hold you to it. We'll bring you.
I'm dead serious. Yes. That's how I got to Haiti. I told somebody I want to go, and next thing I know, I'm out there, yes, helping with medical things. But yes, thank you for your presentation. I really appreciated it. Yeah, all of the different projects, especially in New Orleans. A lot of y'all projects are really resonating with me and some of the work that I'm doing. So just grateful for that. And just wanted to talk about getting people in the space at the site is best. I just wanted to echo you saying that, and yeah, just uplifting how important that is. And I feel like, yeah, we talk about meeting people where they at is, yeah, I feel like it's really just the best, most funnest way to do it. So I just want to.
Yeah, I find the thing is that often, because people read things differently. So lots of times people don't understand a plan, right? They don't, that's a convention, right? It doesn't mean they're not smart or anything, but that's a convention. So if you put them on the site, they'll say, oh, because sometimes they look at the plan, they have no, but then you take them to the site with the plan and they'll say, oh, that's where that is. And that's what that is. Because I often think that we do things to actually keep them at a, in a different level, right? If you bring them out on the site, they actually see stuff. And then there's kind of this kind of equal understanding.
Bring them out to the site and debunk some of the jargon, because I mean that's what it was for me too. It's like, man, I feel like once I read what a planner was, Cal somewhere, I'm like, yeah, that's like a community organizer, like with an extra like duty. So I'm just like, yeah, they just I don't know, but it just seemed disguised in a bit to where we don't understand that we do this stuff every day. We ask questions about our neighborhood all the time in different circles and stuff, and like come up with ideas and solutions, but yeah, they don't recognize it. So yeah, it's happy that we're making those connections. And yeah, I appreciate that project.
Thank you.
Diane, I have a question about working internationally.
Sure.
I had this experience when I went to Mexico to work. I was sort of brought there to do a keynote and put on a workshop. And one of the things I said was like actually, you shouldn't have invited me because I'm this whole thing about colonization and like relying on the people from the outside to come in, or expecting that other people are going to come in. It was really problematic for me. They didn't seem to mind at all, and actually we did some wonderful work. But I wonder, like when you're working in Africa now, like how do you position yourself as this sort of outsider with a certain kind of knowledge, in a way that is still respecting the local expertise?
That's a really good question, and I'm glad you asked it, because I was going really fast, and sometimes when I show that, it seems like I just came there, I just brought my class there, which is what I said, but that's not really true because of just what you said. I worked with a group called Village Life, who's been going there for a long time, because you just can't come in there. Like I have been doing work in Haiti, same thing, you got to really connect to somebody there on the ground, really that's been there, that really, knows the community, because that gives, because often, like I said, even like I've said in Texas, the local communities don't really trust you, in Africa, who are you to just come here? So I got to work on that project through a group called Village Life, which is actually started by an African-American doctor out of Cincinnati, a young Black doctor who over many years had been going there and doing clinics. And then he just kind of expanded, to doing other kind of projects that had to do with health. So he was excited to have a landscape architect come and, work on the garden for the clinic. But that's it, because you just can't step into those places. And I actually think in here in your own country, you shouldn't just step in communities, right? That, you know, you gotta go see, you know, Nakia or, you know, Antwi before you just step, you know what I mean? You need to, you know, because that's often designed, you just go step in, and we shouldn't do that. So that was a good question. Yeah.
Amazing presentation, Diane. Love to see your work. In the chat, what Carl talks about, who holds the plans, and you said the community. Can you talk about how you're able to, it's one thing to say that the community holds the plans. It's another thing to talk about the community having power in the decisions that impact their everyday lives. Can you talk about the way that you've been able to bring that to reality in the 3 projects, or one of the projects, or whatever you want, that you shared with us?
That's a great question, because the plan should reflect the needs of their everyday lives, right? I mean, often that's the thing that doesn't happen, but it should happen. I mean, the plans often, especially when you know, when design comes from, you know, the city decided that this is, you know, the community needs a park, or the city decides, you know, or someone else decides, you know, so the plan should reflect their everyday lives. In that project in New Orleans, I mean, those people, they were coming there to protest, and they wanted a place where they could protest. That's what they needed, where, you know, part of the community and the grant funders were like, oh, we should have nice trees and benches, and but so, you know, and the same thing in Africa. You know, we had preconceived notions. We came thinking, well, the garden should be this, and they were like, oh no, when people come to the clinic here, the whole family comes and we stay here. So we need they wanted hammocks so they could, you know, the family could rest outside, where they, you know, they wanted food, they wanted a vegetable garden. They wanted, you know, a healing path, which that really, like, I was like, wow, you know? And so the plan should reflect the needs. And often there is a conflict in the funding, I mean, between, you know, where a project emanates from and how well it will reflect a community's needs.
I think we have a little more time for at least one more question, if anybody has one.
I have a question. So I wanted to ask Marquita, like, do you think it makes a difference that the planner, or the, you know, the planner, the activist, the designer, whoever, looks like the community? I debate that, because I've had people say that, are you saying that only Black people can work in Black communities? And I said, no, I'm not saying that. But I just wanted to ask you guys, you know, we can have better answers when people push back on me, or when they ask me that. What do you think about that?
So yes, I definitely think just because you Black, I meant, like you said, when you go so fast, you don't get to say some stuff. So I didn't get to say that disclaimer, that even though we pride ourselves on doing culturally relevant engagement, just because I'm Black, it's a very different variations of Black American in the community. So I already know and say out loud that I don't, you know, I don't represent everybody yet, you feel me? Through the community engagement, you know, I've tried to compile enough consent, or not consent, but, you know, ideas around a certain concept. But for me, I just check myself, even being born and raised from Deep East Oakland, like, I have somewhat of a privilege, yet I don't take that for granted that I'm from here and that I feel the same way as folks. Cause I mean, yeah, I'm different just from, people in my family. I'm kind of, very different. So I know having that experience within my family is like, I know I have to approach people, and that's why we say meet them where they at. So like I forgot David said, like, or somebody said, like, get invited to the party. Like, East Oakland, you know, the Bay is kind of diverse. So I've grown up with a lot of different cultures. I've been rooted in the Black community, yet been able to interface with these different cultures. I kind of know some of what they like to do. So I kind of know how to meet them a little bit where they at, to talk about certain things and try to meet a common ground. But I appreciate David's question, because I do want to also do work internationally, and that's one of my biggest hurdles and fears. I'm very privileged in doing this place-based work of my hometown, but I definitely want to step out other places internationally and across the US. So thanks for that question, David. But John, you cannot take for granted that you're the same color, sexual orientation, or whatever, that you just understand somebody. You got to understand. That's why I tried to define equity. Like, first understand what's the common language or understanding of certain things, and don't just take for granted that we on the same page.
David or Antwi, do you want to weigh in on that question?
The international work question again?
Well, no, not so much the international work question, but this question of diversity in the profession and design in particular, relative to working with communities, and how race plays into those relationships. Which is, do you need to be identified in that community to be effective?
I mean, I don't think you do. I think you bring an attitude of openness and curiosity and humility to the work, and you just keep showing up. And like Keita says, there's so many different expressions within what people consider to be one race or ethnic group. The work that I'm doing in Tahoe right now, we were talking about the Latinx community, and of course, then some people within the community want to say, no, don't call it Latinx. I'm Hispanic, or the Hispanic community, and there's this really interesting tension, I think, within the community, even of people who are first generation from this one particular town, and then the second generation folks that actually have gone on through the U.S. educational system and come back to do work in the city, but don't feel connected to the roots of the community anymore. So there's so many different variations of it. I think even the people that are part of the community don't necessarily feel like they belong to the whole. They can't speak for the whole community anyways. So I mean, for me, it's just really being really open and curious.
I mean, I'll say, I think it definitely helps, right? I think just like you couldn't go into a community and not speak the language,
Mm-hmm.
I think having shared experiences is really important to building trust and to community building and to really designing for equity. And so I think when you can have culturally concordant and people who have shared experiences on a team that comes into the community, and when you flip the script and you redistribute who has the power, as Keita said in the beginning, and you put the community in the center of driving those decisions, now you're on the right path. And that's just the beginning of the path. And I think the questions that Diane and David raised about always looking at who's missing and who's not there, and yes, being open, but I think I would be remiss to say that race, gender, sexual orientation, disability, like all of these things impact our perception, even our lens to see the built environment or to make the invisible visible. So like if we're all going into design to do a transportation plan and none of us have a disability, the people with the disability, if you've ever had a disability or understand a disability or had a time in your life where you couldn't move from point A to point B well, or you were blind or what have you, it changes the way that you would actually make a recommendation for that design decision. So I think it's very, very important that we always keep that in mind. We can't just have a bunch of open-minded people that do not have the shared lived experience of the people in the community and expect that we're going to design for equity.
Excellent, Antwi. I'm so glad you jumped in on that one. That's the perfect segue for you to just continue that and go ahead and cue up your talk.
Great.
Funding is always a critical limitation to real deep community work. And almost every project that I've been engaged in, that the funding has been a huge limitation to really do the kind of sustained work that's necessary. And so I was just hoping that you all could speak to methods that you've used to work with bureaucracies to change their perspective from the beginning of a project and bring these different technologies to bear in the process.
Is that for me, Chris, or is that for the
For
panel?
you and for anyone else that wants to jump in on that, because I know Keita's worked on that, and I'm sure that David and Diane have as well. So.
Trying to get my lighting right here. Go ahead, y'all. Jump on in that.
Sorry, Chris, I was giving Antwi props in the chat. Can you repeat it really quickly?
Yeah, sure. I was focused on, really the need to have change within the bureaucracies that do control the levers of a lot of community projects, infrastructure, you name it. And, methods that you all have found successful in changing the perspective of the bureaucracy from the outset to allow for the funding and the real process that's required to do this kind of real people-powered participatory design.
All right, I mean, I'll jump in. Yeah, so it's on Twee, everybody, on Twee. Turn the light on, which I'm trying to do in Twee, on Twee. And, the thing is that I think the old way of doing things, for us, for Streetwise, I do believe we need structural change from cities. But when I talk about, and when we talk about building power and self-determination, I think that's the real power of Streetwise, is that it's coming from the people. It's about what Keita said earlier. It's about activating the built environment via activating everyday people. And an example of that is when you had one person complaining about those liquor stores and corner stores, they can often feel powerless. But when you can actually take that to scale through a platform like Streetwise, you find out that, or social media, right? But Streetwise does things that social media doesn't do, right? So when you're able to use participatory technologies to amplify your message, and this is what you've seen over time, Chris and others, is that social media, just like the internet democratizes everything, social media can put the power back in the hands of everyday people who generally didn't have power before. And so we've been able to see with Streetwise communities that may not have had power in a more traditional engagement process actually have a lot more power, because they have digital storytelling, because they're able to connect and organize better, and because they have the data to back up what they're doing. So in that food example, and I'll pass it to the next other brilliant panelist, there wasn't a farmer's market at that school. So the policy win was all of a sudden there was a farmer's market. We went to the Cal Fresh Fund. Keita, I don't even know if you know this. We went to the Cal Fresh Fund and we went to each of those different liquor stores and corner stores in the neighborhood, and we got them to restock during that time the actual produce and food that they were using in those neighborhoods, in those liquor stores and corner stores. And then they also used some of that data to help pass Measure JJ, which was the food commissary for the city of Oakland. And so that's one way that using these kinds of community engaged participatory co-design and coupling it with participatory technology can really transfer who has the power in the way that democratize data and democratize decision making.
I wanted to say that, the thing that's exciting about this is the fact that, you have data, really. And that's, it's kind of like using, your question was about then how do you, work with the powers to get them to change? Well, it's kind of like using it's hard for them to argue against that. And using the tool that they usually use is where we have this data that shows, but he's saying, you're getting real data, like really real-time data off the street. So you're kind of using, the tool that they usually do, but you're kind of using it in a new, more powerful way. I really love that. I mean, it's kind of the way like I try to use history to say, okay, here's some historic data that proves this. And so this is really, really exciting, real exciting.
If I can just jump in and add, it's having the data, and it's also like knowing how the bureaucracy works well enough. So like mapping out the power system within that you're working with. So bureaucracies, and you know, I live in Sacramento, so, and I work for the UC, so my life is just all one big bureaucracy. But within the bureaucracy are people, right? There's still people at the university, people at the city, people at the county. And within that system, there's a lot of people who are your allies. Used to call them guerrilla bureaucrats, people inside the system that you know they've got you, and they're going to try their best, but they're still working within a bunch of constraints. So there's like the strategizing around how to get the data, or how to, you know, sometimes it's about embarrassing politicians. I mean, that's a really powerful tool. Sometimes it's just about presenting your arguments so well that it can't be refuted. But I just wanted to emphasize the relationship building.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off of that. Did on what Antwi said. East EOC, East Oakland residents, we always looking for the self-empowerment way of things. Kind of fell into the working with the government and contracts and stuff like that. Really, again, Spirit of the Panthers would like to get it out the mud and find it our own way. But the reality is, some of these funds and stuff are available, so we've been leveraging it. So some of the methods that's been working while we've been in this space, David, like you said, we gotta build rapport and build relationship. We talk about trust building and doing all these very transformative things, and it's like we know it's facts that we don't trust the city, like for various reasons. Like just starting there, like get past that, you know, lack of trust or whatnot. And so for us, yeah, the relationship building, and for a community to really have to stand tall and firm on what we are and be organized. Like once we seem unorganized, it's opportunity for whoever it is on the other side to just not take us as serious. So I've seen that. So yeah, being real unapologetic and organized, being participatory, like Antwi, and being really solution oriented. You know, when working with governments and folks that have so many constraints, really try to be. It's just a lot of emotional intelligence that has to, I don't know, to me, be developed on all ends, not just community. And for us, we've been trying to get governments and private folks to fund restorative justice. Everybody have all this equity and restorative language, but like, who is funding this? Who's funding us having these hard conversations? Who's funding me having whatever, somebody feeling harmed, and just the mental stress and stuff that goes with it? The agency, they be on salary, y'all got therapy, y'all got all of this resources to these things to deal with these hard restorative conversations. And EOC, we had a place that we do now, but I didn't 5 years ago. So I was having to do all this work, and it was super exhaustive. Financially, wasn't getting paid like everybody else. I'm stressed. I still live here in the same place that I'm serving, so I'm still dealing with the conditions. So yeah, methods that work for us is, yeah, again, hold them to the fire and really trying to get them to fund restorative justice and that healing portion in those hard conversations that it takes to really get through this work of getting people to feel uncomfortable. That getting uncomfortable, yeah, that costs a little bit because people gonna feel some kind of way, and you gotta pay for the healing.
All right, I want to build on that a little bit with a question from an attendee, and it's related to funding. It's in situations where funding only allows for limited engagement or visits. What are some strategies or suggestions about how to work with communities authentically while also acknowledging that long-term engagement may not be immediately funded? So it's like, how do you build some trust and be acknowledging that from the beginning?
I'll just open it up. I think sometimes it's sort of a question of time, you know, in our time frames, and it is true, like in the time frame of your typical planning project or design project, we don't put in the year that like an anthropologist would go to a place, get to know it, understand everything, and then come back with a report. There's no way to do that well, or as well as that. But I mean, there are strategies when a project is getting started when you have some opportunities to put in more time. and to take advantage of those wherever you can. Put in more budget for the engagement parts of a project. But sometimes we are looking for the shortcut. We're looking how to speed things up. And in academia and like in public process too, sometimes you just have to go slow. Sometimes you just have to be patient and just stay with it. And that just takes a lot of commitment and a lot of keeping, a lot of consistency. So there's both, yes, fast and slow, fast and steady.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
What was the core question again, Chris?
The core question was really, focused on strategies that you can employ when you have limited funding and/or time to be effective in authentic engagement and participatory design.
Yeah, I thought that was the question. I mean, I feel like that was my whole presentation. I mean, that's one of the strategies, right? I think when you have limited funding or no funding, or you're on a shoestring budget, I think you have to find ways to amplify the voices of the community. And I think you're remiss if technology can be one of those ways. We also, I want to be clear, work in a lot of really technologically challenged environments. So, my own family, part of my family is from Ghana, West Africa. The other part's from Louisiana. And I grew up in New York and Louisiana, and then basically lived out here in Oakland and the Bay Area. But we built streetwise so that you could go into really rural spaces and places that had unbelievable amounts of poverty and where people didn't have smartphones, and the platform would still work as a way for folks to organize and really change, transform the social material conditions that they are living in, and lift up community voice. So I think my short answer to that is there's tools and platforms that can really amplify community voice, and there's processes. And I think the process is more important than the platform. I actually think having a racial and social justice approach, I really invite designers, architects, planners, and engineers to embrace this idea of really that's why I started with race at the front of this conversation, but I could have started with gender in similar ways, or other intersecting forms of oppression. And I really invite us to rethink and reimagine doing business as usual, and really giving up the power and putting that in the hands of people. And I think we would begin to see our neighborhoods would look different and feel different and be much more responsive.
Great answer, but I also, great answer, I agree. I also think too, it's, so in a project, there is so much funding, you're right. So you're saying, okay, so you don't have a lot of funding. But I think the question is where the funding goes. I mean, that was part of the issue we had on the MLK project, was that they had, they got a grant for so much, and we actually had to tell them that you have to do this community engagement, or you're not going to have steward, people aren't going to take care of it. So you have so much funding, and it's like about, even if you're working with a public agency, which we do a lot of, and they have, so much for, the concept and analysis, you have to like fight with them about how they're distributing it, and you can't do it in the same old ways. I agree with Auntie. You can't approach these things in the same old ways. So it's it's not as much about, it is about how much funding, but it's also about where the funding's going. You have to rethink where the funding's going.
Redistribute the power.
All right.
One more quick thing on that. I think, just to piggyback what Diane is saying, when you get these proposals, and we've been in a bunch of them, community engagement, to Kita's point, it's like 10, you'd be lucky to get 10% for the proposal, right? So that alone is something that the people who are listening to this can really start to rethink. Like, you're undervaluing it from the very beginning. And that's sort of Einstein's definition of insanity, right? You continue to do the same thing, thinking that you're going to get a different result. So I think there's an opportunity there to like really put in more funding and take it much, instead of putting all of the funding and making it top heavy, really do the funding in a much more equitable way, I think would be a real transformation for the field.
Yeah, and to go along with that, I think part of the problem too is in education. We stress design so much and not realizing that community engagement impacts design. It should. If your community engagement isn't informing your design, I mean, that's the point of it, right? That's the point of it, that it's kind of like, you're doing that because you want the people to shape the outcome. And so often what happens is community engagement's over here, we just do it and then we go in design, right? But it should shape the design. And if you think of it that way, then you're willing to put more into it because it's going to really impact the outcome. But we don't teach that way in school. We're just starting to, maybe we need more professors like David, and and we're not practicing or arguing for that. Because for somehow we don't think that it really impacts the form making, but it should. No.
I know we got a minute, Chris, but that's exactly what EOC experienced in the Resilient by Design challenge that we was with CMG. Like, we got input in this challenge at the end of the third phase of the process. It was like, wait, community engagement should have been at the front. Like, y'all been designing or talking for two phases without us. So I've experienced that, and just want to end on, I just don't like the term robust. We get asked to provide robust, engagement, but on these little skimpy budgets. So I just want it's real that the expectations be so high, knowing it being commonly known that the money is not enough. So just work on that.
Yeah, and just one last thing that I want us to move from saying that we should be doing it, that it should be informing to design, to that we want to be doing it because it will make all of our designs so much better. And we just need to keep demonstrating that, but that's what it does. And I think we have plenty of evidence here.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. We're just a little bit over here, but yeah, that was incredible 2 hours. It's such a broad, set of ideas and perspectives. And I know I learned a lot. I think that the whole audience learned a lot here. I just want everyone to take a moment to send our gratitude to such an inspiring and gracious panel. Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you all at CMG for your leadership in this also.
Cheers. I'd also like to give a shout out to our team here at CMG who helped frame this topic, convene the panel, and organize the event. So give a hand to Lauren Stahl, Jamie Houston, and Lauren Hackney for making this happen. They did all the work. I'm just here because they asked me to be here. And then lastly, the concept for our third discussion in this series is really meant to focus on what it means to design more equitable and inclusive communities, not just in terms of governance or process or engagement, but literally the lived experience and what it feels like to belong in a place. And importantly, how design makes a place more or less inclusive. So that's a loose frame for it. We haven't really fleshed it out yet, but watch for it in 2023. And with that, thanks to everyone for joining us and good night. Cheers.
Bye.